So then now we have the data that we need when a user types in some kind of location over here, we can start to take that data and output it to the screen. So in essence, we can update the UI of the application. So to do that, what we need to do is first of all, get a reference to a couple of different things in the DOM. We need the card wrapper and also the details wrapper for down here. So let's just have a look in index.html to see what these things are. We have up here this div with a class of card. We need to get that just so we can update things like the image right here and the icon later maybe. And also we need to get a reference to this thing here because we're going to output the details as well. Now this has a class of details. So we need the card and we need the details. So in app.js, I'm going to go to the top and first of all, I'm going to do a const called card and set that equal to documents.querySelector. And then we want the card element. Okay, now we do the second one, which is const details and set that equal to documents.querySelector again. This time we want the details class like so. So we have those two right there. Now what I'm going to do now is create a new function called update UI, and that function is going to be responsible for taking in some data and outputting it to the browser using these references. So what I'll do is say const and then call this update UI like so and set it equal to an arrow function. And this arrow function is then going to update the UI. Now we're going to take in some data, and that data is ultimately going to be this stuff right here that we get back down here. So what I'm going to do, instead of logging this to the console right now, is I'm going to call this function update UI and pass in that data. So let me do that. Update UI and pass in the data. So now we're making the requests, we're getting the data back, then we're calling update UI, passing in that data, and it's this function's job now to then output all of this data to the DOM. So let me try and do that. First of all, I'm going to say const city debts is equal to the data that we take in, dot city debts. So all I'm doing is getting this property that we put onto the object back off it, and I'm storing it in this local variable called city debts. So whenever we use this, we don't now have to write data.citydebts, we can just write city debts. And I'm going to do the same thing for the weather. I'm going to say const weather is equal to data.weather. Okay, so we have those two local variables. Now we need to update the details template. So let me say update details template right here. Now, if we look at the details template over here, we can see that it's all this stuff right here. We output the name, the weather, and the temperature. So what I'm going to do is just get this details thing over here because we now have a reference to the parent of all of that. So I'm going to say details, then set the inner HTML equal to something new. And this is going to be a template string. So we're essentially going to output a new template right here, which is going to overwrite the current template in here. But it's going to be exactly the same syntax. So we'll just copy that and we're just going to paste it in here. So let me just scoot this in a bit. And now we can see we have the H5, the div for the weather, and the div for the temperature right here. So instead of hard coding this stuff, all we need to do is output the actual data. So the city name, for example, is going to be output right here. So we need $ and curly braces to output some kind of variable. And then what we want is the city debts. And oops, we need to do this in the correct case. So let's say city debts. And if we look at the object over here, this city debts object, this has a property called English name. So that's what I want to output here. That's the city name. So dot English name like that. Starts with a capital and name starts with a capital. Now we need the weather condition. So this is again going to be a variable, and this time we want the weather object and we want to use a property on that. Now if we look at the weather object over here, if I can expand that, now the weather has different properties down here. What do we want to output? We want the weather text. So let's use that property. We'll say dot weather text like so. Again, capital W, capital T. And then finally we want the temperature down here. Now that is a little more complex to get. So it's inside this temperature property. Then we go inside metric, and then we get the value. This is degrees Celsius. So let me come down here and do a $, curly braces to output a variable. Then we want the weather object first of all, which is this. Then we want the dot temp, then dot metric, and then dot value. And notice they all start with a capital letter. So we're outputting those now. So let's test this. I'm going to save it and come over here. And if I type in now Manchester and press enter, now we can see all of that data is now over here. We have Manchester, cloudy, and 12.3 degrees Celsius. Now, when we first load the page over here, I don't want this to show by default. I only want it to show once we've entered something up here. So what I'm going to do now is go to the index, and I'm going to come up to the card, which is right here, and I'm going to give this a class of d-none. Remember, this is a Bootstrap class which says, okay, well, make this display none. So if I save it now, then we don't see it on the page to begin with. Now, when I type something in and press enter, and we get that data back, and we output the template, or update the template rather, then I want to remove this class. So inside this update UI, we need to check if the card, which we now have a reference of, if it has that class of d-none, let's remove it. So let's do a little comment first of all. Remove the d-none class if present. So we need to do an if check first of all to see if it has that class, because it might not have that class if this is the second time we're updating. So if it does, let's have a look. If card, which we have a reference for, dot class list dot contains, and then we want to see if it contains d-none. So if that is true, it means it has that class. Then we want to remove it. So we say card dot class list dot remove, and we want to remove d-none. So now we're removing that class if it has it. So now this is all done. If we save it, come over here, we don't see that to begin with, but if we type something in, press enter, we should now see all that information. And now if we update, let's say New York, it updates the template as well. Awesome.